Hi, everybody. I thought instead of writing the newsletter article that I would normally write each month, that maybe I'd do something a little bit different on this month. And I thought, what better way to do something different than maybe a video recording? Now, if you've ever joined us for evening prayer on a Thursday evening, you'll know that instead of a sermon, I like to give a story about something that happened this week in church history, or maybe about the saint of the week. And so I thought I would do it this week by sharing something that happened on this particular day in church history. On a cold November morning, when William of Orange landed at Brixham, which was just on the southern coast of England, with about 15,000 troops from the Netherlands. Now, his arrival, it wasn't seen as an invasion, but it was really celebrated as a liberation. And it was on this day in church history, November the 5th, 1688, that changed England forever. Now, that day itself carries a little bit of weight, because on November 5th, it was already known as Guy Fawkes Day. Remember the 5th of November? And it was when Protestants celebrated the failure of a Catholic gunpowder plot to kill James I, the king, in 1605. So when a Protestant prince landed on English soil that same day to challenge a Catholic king, a lot of people saw this as a divinely timed thing, almost like God had once again rescued England from Catholic rule. But to understand what made that day possible, we really have to rewind really more than a century. Now, we know some of the story about England's Reformation and England's relationship with the church and the crown, and it had been uneasy ever since Henry VIII's breakup with Rome in the 1530s. But remember, the split wasn't about theology, really. It was about control. Once Henry declared himself head of the Church of England, politics and faith were fused together. His son Edward spread out the Protestant Reformation. Mary tried to undo it and return England to Catholicism, burning hundreds of Protestants in the process and earning the nickname Bloody Mary. And it left deep scars, and the English people were never quite the same after it, and they certainly never forgot. And then Elizabeth tried to steer a middle course, keeping the bishops and keeping the prayer book and then ceremony while rejecting papal authority. And it worked for her reign, but honestly, it worked just barely. Because after she died, the country was divided again between Puritans, those who wanted to strip away anything that looked remotely like anything Catholic, and the Royalists, who supported the traditional church with bishops and with liturgy. Now, King James I and his son Charles I leaned heavily towards that high church model, and they defended bishops and the idea that kings ruled by divine right. But Parliament didn't buy it, and they believed that kings answered to the people. And it was a fight that turned bloody. Now, the English Civil War ended with Charles I losing his throne and losing his head. For a time, England became a Puritan republic under Oliver Cromwell, who banned the Book of Common Prayer, shut down the cathedrals, and even outlawed Christmas and some other celebrations. And the people hated it, right? And so when Cromwell died, they brought back the monarchy under Charles II in 1660. When his brother James II, who was openly Catholic, came to the throne, those old fears came roaring back, and the English people saw Catholicism again as a threat to liberty and the Protestant faith that defined their nation. They had watched people like Louis XIV of France persecute the Protestants across the Channel, and they feared the same fate for themselves. And then James baptized his newborn son as Catholic, and it created the prospect of a permanent Catholic dynasty. And for the people of England, for many of the people, that was a breaking point. Parliament invited William of Orange, the Dutch Protestant husband of James's daughter Mary, to come to England. And William had his own reasons. Right? William had been fighting to stop Catholic France from dominating Europe. Now, if England allied with France, Protestant Europe could be lost. So when he accepted Parliament's invitation, it wasn't just about religion. For William, it was about survival. And he landed on November the 5th, 1688. His troops marched inland. English nobles and officers, they deserted James in droves. And James had to flee to France. And by December, the throne was empty. Parliament declared that he had abdicated. And in early the next year, 1689, William and Mary were crowned joint monarchs of England, Scotland, and Ireland. And it was called the Glorious Revolution. Glorious not because almost no blood was shed, but its impact was anything but small. It ended the idea that kings ruled by divine right, and it placed real power in Parliament. It enshrined Protestant succession in the monarchy, and that's a rule that still stands today. For the church, it marked a turning point. The Church of England stayed established as the state church, but it no longer existed to serve the king's absolute power. It served now the nation. And the Toleration Act of 1689, it allowed Protestant dissenters, Baptists and Presbyterians and others, to worship legally for the very first time. Now, it wasn't full equality, but it did plant the seed of religious tolerance. Now, Scotland took another path. When William took the throne, he agreed to make Presbyterianism the national religion of Scotland. The Scottish Episcopalians, who had supported James II, became known as the Jacobites. That was Latin for the name of James. And they had failed uprisings in 1715 and 1745, and it left them persecuted for decades. And that struggle, strangely enough, helped shape the Episcopal Church in America. Because after the American Revolution, Anglicans who were here in the colonies could no longer look to the King of England for bishops. So they turned to the same Scottish Episcopalians who had consecrated Samuel Seabury as the first American bishop in 1784. And the Episcopal Church that we know today grew out of that moment. A church still Anglican in theology and in worship, but very democratic in its structure, balancing authority and freedom. So really, why should we care about the 5th of 1688? And it's really because that day reshaped what it meant to be Anglican. It taught that the church can thrive without clinging to political power, and that faith can live in balance with liberty. England lost a king, but it found its balance, and we are still standing on it today. The Glorious Revolution didn't end the struggle between faith and power, but it certainly taught us how to live with it. It began on this day, November the 5th, 1688. If you enjoy this, I would encourage you to join us for evening prayer. Sometimes these are a little bit shorter, but we cover the same thing on Thursdays and take a little bit of a deep dive into church history and the things that made the faith and the things that built the church. Hope you have a great day, and we will talk to you on Sunday.